All right. Thanks again, Matt. And I will just start off, as many of you are aware, we had a winter storm come through at the end of yesterday and last night. I am working from home today. Please let me know if there's any difficulties with audio or visual, anything from my internet connection. So to start with the residential cross connections, the whole purpose of why cross connections are just part of this multi-barrier approach that we take with our water systems. We're basically, for any of you out there, you're aware it's a whole very complex thing, regardless of the size of your water system. There's multiple ways we can have problems develop with a water system, and there's multiple ways that we can try to address those. So among the things that we do, we look at source water protection. There's all kinds of monitoring that we do, and that continues through the whole process. Some of you may treat. We look to keep continuous pressure throughout a system. We do even testing and distribution, whether it's for bacteria. Again, for those of you who treat, our residuals being maintained. Cross-connection prevention is one of the final barriers that we have in place, which is taking place actually getting out to our points of use and where we have our customers. It's going to be one of the final things we have to actually be able to catch whether or not the water is going to be safe for the use of any of our users out there. So what we're going to try to actually look at and establish it for this whole residential portion on why do we have to consider it? What do we expect of you as the water supply? And basically, what requirements are we putting onto you? What is EGLE's then role in this, and how do we regulate it? What is our oversight? And then at the end, just hopefully some things on how can we try to get an effective program actually being administered. So to start, again, why residential? Why has this been coming up? Well, the truth is, it's actually been there from the start. It has certainly gotten more attention recently, but going all the way back to 1976, when the statute was enacted, we had within the sub-rule that as far as cross connections being prohibited, this applies to all customer types, such as industrial, commercial, institutional, governmental, and single and multi-unit residential. It has been out there. Really what has changed is both with some of the recent events, I will say in the last decade or so in the water industry, there is more attention being paid by legislators, by our actual consumers. People want to be sure that their water is safe to use. Cross connections is one of the things that has gotten stirred up and kind of put in the spotlight because of this extra attention. And it's definitely out there. Things have been happening. This goes for known backflow incidents as far as being from the CDC that there have been, in this case, 57 waterborne disease outbreaks that have been connected to cross connections, resulting in a little over 9,700 illnesses. The EPA, from a similar span of time, a little bit more, but have found 459 incidents, resulting in an almost 12,000. There's, I believe, an extra zero there, and almost 13,000 illnesses. And this is the actual breakdown of those incidents. You can see that we have this mystery other category that is leading the way, but then of the different consumer types, residential is actually leading the way at almost 20% of those incidents that have been connected to cross connections. And well, that kind of makes sense, because if you look at your system, the majority of your users, just by the numbers, are going to be residential. This is going to vary from system to system, but generally you're going to be looking 80+%. Just most of the final destinations, most of the points of use that you have your water going to are going to be households. Most backflow incidents are not really going to have a significant impact. They're going to be very brief. Many of them may go undetected, and whether they called illness or not, we might not ever know exactly when or how it came to be. It's just one of the difficulties of trying to track some of this down. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be making the effort. We talked about some of the ways that we can prevent things and why we're looking to prevent some of these problems yesterday. In the next presentation, we're going to be seeing some of the pictures and real world examples of how we can have contamination resulting from cross connections occur. This risk is included in homes, just because most of the time it may be low risk. Most of the time we may not have anything serious come of it. Doesn't mean it won't happen at all. Backflow from residential sites is still a significant problem that will need our attention. One of the big reasons it can be such a problem, there's just less oversight. You're going to know some of who your biggest users are. If they're commercial or industrial, you might have a better working relationship with them. Just by the numbers of there being a whole lot more households, apartments, condominiums, whatever type of residences they are, there's a lot out there, and there is some of that expectation of privacy. We just aren't necessarily as involved with how they're using their water and what some of their plumbing setups can be. And this can lead to some problems, specifically, as you can see on the title in this, unpermitted work. People, sometimes they're trying to get a work around something, other times it's just an innocent mistake, but things aren't always going to be done the way that we would like them to be done. So examples of some problems leading back to residential. This first example actually comes from within Michigan. Back in 1991, there were parasitic worms that ended up being found in some homes that ended up being attributed to a broken lawn sprinkler system. Basically, what happened is there was an underground sprinkler system that was not working properly. There was a localized enough of a pressure drop that it actually had backflow occur. With that backflow, we actually had some of these parasitic worms called nematodes sucked into the plumbing systems, and they were noticed when one of the homeowners actually went to fill their bathtub for their child. And lo and behold, there were some worms as long as other debris that were in the tub. This just goes to show that even if it's just one or two households impacted, this is an example of that backflow leading to potentially very risky problems. And we've got some more examples. This is kind of going around the country. This is from the American Water Works Association. They have a list of some of these incidents that have occurred. We've got at the top there, out in Colorado, there was a family awarded almost $1 million in damages after raw sewage was introduced into their drinking water. In Idaho, there was a breakout of coliform that was discovered at a school. And again, going through some of these, we have, again, another faulty irrigation system that led to 13 families getting ill from Giardia. We have a private contractor who hooked up plumbing incorrectly to an unsafe source. Another one from Idaho, 80 residents getting sick over Memorial Day due to contaminated drinking water. And then in South Carolina, again, there was a homeowner who had their story about their water supply becoming contaminated from an irrigation system. Of the 20 case examples that they have in this AWWA manual, 8 of them are attributed to residential problems. That was about 40% of the cases that they chose to discuss. Another set of examples, if you're ever looking for some reading material, because we all have just plentiful free time. But if you ever wanted to look, there's this backflowcases.com. And again, they document all kinds of different examples of backflow incidents contaminating drinking water supplies. A good portion of them do involve residential sources. So when it comes to actually trying to address some of these problems, the first thing that we're going to start with is going to be what we're calling a cross-connection plan. This should not be confused with your program. What the cross-connection plan is going to be a written outline of the program that you will then be implementing. Basically, how are you going to go about trying to address some of these cross connections? This plan is what gets approved by EGLE. And then you can always go back to it. It's what's going to give you the overall structure for how are you going to go about trying to, again, implement your program if you ever encounter any barriers. Again, it should be outlined here. How do we try to address some of those? The program itself then is going to be the spelling out more of how is this going to be administered? What is the expectations? What are your requirements for inspections? What methods of backflow prevention are you going to accept with your water system? If that includes testing, what are your testing requirements going to be? What level of commitment are you making? Time allowed to comply is going to be looking at then when you find issues, what kind of schedule, how quick of a response do you want to see that things are being fixed? And then the record keeping aspect of it. And we're going to look at each of these parts in a little bit more detail. So for the administration of your cross-connection control program, we have an excerpt. It's basically, again, this is what we're looking for per Act 399. What are you going to have to do? You should have a complete description of the method of administering the program, including, and this is one that, we need to make sure, the designation of who, whether it's a single person, single agency, or if you have multiple people, agencies involved, multiple people involved, who are the people that should actually be carrying out your cross-connection program. These can be internal staff. You may contract it out to people. It should be spelled out here. You should also have the authority for implementation of the program. If you recall back from our presentations yesterday, this is typically going to be some kind of ordinance, a bylaw, something of that, but it's what actually gives you the legal right to be implementing your program. By default, we assume that your residential is not going to be administered differently than any of the other customers. If you were going to have any, again, special cases, this is where things should be called out and specifically saying if there's a difference or if there's a unique way that you want to handle things, it should be defined here. You don't want it to just be a spur of the moment, someone, making a call just on the fly. For your inspections, really what you want to spell out is going to be the difference between how you're going to accept external versus internal inspections. This is basically the difference between external. Are you just going to do it once around a house, know what you see, versus internal. Usually this is might be limited to just with the basement, but basically you're looking for where's the water actually coming into the house. Are you noting any particular uses of the water that you want to have protection against? And just, again, looking for what are you going to accept? What will these entail? And then the frequency of these inspections. How often do you want to be coming back to properties when it comes to, say, a new development, whether it's a whole neighborhood, single home? How quickly do you expect to get out there to take a look at things? That should all be, again, in writing with your program. You should have inspection forms to cover whether if you are going to have just very brief preliminary visits, like, again, your external going once around, if you want more detailed forms to record things. I have also seen water systems they have an approach where maybe you want to call it a survey, but it's kind of a little postcard or pamphlet kind of thing that they will send out to users. They're actually have the homeowners, the users, fill those out themselves and send them back. They will use that to screen out, okay, where might we need to make some of these internal inspections? Where might we want to have a closer look? All of these, again, should be you'll have documented a master template somewhere. These are the forms that we're willing to accept, or maybe if you don't have a precise template, what information do we want to have recorded from these inspections? When it comes to EGLE, and then through that, the state of Michigan, we do not have a specific frequency at coming to residential sites. Again, we're looking at more so, we want things treated based on low hazard versus high hazard, and the system deciding what is the appropriate frequency to be there. But if you were to call out your, again, specifics on these customers, we want to be getting out this often, that should be accompanying the, again, your instructions basically for how do you want inspections to be done. With your methods of prevention, we got to see some of these, well, actually just about all of them when it comes to the presentation we made yesterday. But as a reminder, you have your air gap, which is the actual physical separation of the plumbing systems, or then you can get into your actual backflow preventers, where we have testable assemblies like an RPZ or double check valve assembly, your pressure vacuum breakers, or then getting into some of your non-testable vented double check valves, atmospheric vacuum breakers. Basically, you will spell out how do you want things to be addressed. If you encounter this type of hazard, this is what we want to accept. Or just maybe you put a blanket statement out there, our minimum requirement is this kind of device or this kind of assembly. Again, when it comes to residential, by default, they should not be getting different treatment as far as how you're performing this backflow prevention. Either it's going to be a low hazard or high hazard, either you have back pressure or back siphonage risk. How you match your method of prevention should just be appropriate for the site. It shouldn't matter what customer class it is. When it comes to this testing, again, the testing frequencies, the backflow preventers aren't any different. The testing shouldn't be any different. You still want to make sure that it is qualified personnel who is performing the testing. Just because it's at a residence doesn't mean you should just accept if the homeowner's like, yeah, it still looks okay. You want to make sure it's actually properly tested and that that testing is going to be properly documented. Some of the challenges, because there can be so many of them out there, a lot of these come back to your irrigation systems, but you might have people who aren't qualified, or maybe they can put it in, but they don't have, like with this ASSE 5110, maybe not the certifications for it to be officially accepted for their results. People might not know that, or it might be misrepresented. You might have do-it-yourself projects. Again, these homeowners just deciding, I'll save a buck, I can do this myself. Unwilling participants, either because they feel like you're invading their privacy, or they're not willing to pay for the work to be done. This is where, from previously on our slides, having that authority established on why you are allowed to ask for this, or why you were allowed to do this, to have this work performed, is important to have. And then something I've personally seen, for some of us, depending on these devices and assemblies, winterization does matter. When some of them are external, I know I've actually been to some of my own water systems. Things will freeze up and a pipe will burst. You might get a part of the casing to crack on the actual assembly itself. They can be damaged, and sometimes you can see that externally. Sometimes it might just be the internal mechanisms. A spring gets damaged, something gets bent out of place. That's why testing, for those that you can't see, testing will catch that for you. The compliance and enforcement aspect then of the program is going to help address some of those unwilling participants, as well as then just really any areas where you find where action needs to be taken. In a perfect world, everyone would be cooperative, stuff would be getting taken care of right away, but that doesn't always happen, as I'm sure all of you are aware. When it comes to these unwilling participants, there's some people, again, it might be a financial issue. They might just philosophically not agree that you have the right to come in and task them with getting these things corrected. In other cases, it might be like supply chain issues. But when it comes to your compliance and enforcement section, it should be written in detail. Again, you want to make sure that that ordinance, bylaw, whatever your authority is, maybe just keep a copy of it right here. If you don't have that, at least call out, say exactly where you can find this document if you need to lean back on it. And basically, it's going to help address, again, your timelines, what is appropriate corrective action, how you're going to accept proof of something being handled, whether it's a follow-up visit, if you're going to accept, say, just a photo or receipt from the customers. And then for more so on the enforcement side, when things aren't being done either to the level of quality that you have required or with the timing that you required, how do you respond to that? Are you going to give them a chance of, say, send a reminder letter or two first? Are you going to potentially impose fines or some kind of fees onto those customers? Might you even take it as far as a shutoff? And these are things that are going to depend possibly on what level of risk is being presented. But what shouldn't be lost in all of this is that, again, just because it's at a private residence does not mean that the problem is not a public health risk. Going back to those examples we saw, it is very easy and does happen where just because a problem originating in a private home can impact a community at large. Maybe it's just their neighborhood, their immediate neighbors, maybe it's the entire block, maybe it even goes beyond that, but they aren't just posing a risk to themselves, and that is why we are involved. And then for your record keeping, there are challenges, again, being posed by the high number of accounts that you will have to be tracking this with. What you want to make sure is that you're able to stay organized. And again, earlier you'll have laid out what exactly you want to be accepting from your inspections, accepting from the testing, or from any corrective action, what you need to have. You may want to consider going digital. If you have the space, you can still use physical files. The most important thing is going to be, you know, where to find these records and that you're able to actually find a specific record that you're looking for. It's going to be important to be able to come back and find this information, because both for the actual operation of your water system to make sure it's safe, but then when it comes to your annual reporting to EGLE, we had that very quick exercise at the end of our presentation yesterday, as well as then planning for your future program needs. What more testing is going to be coming up? What inspections are you going to have to try to schedule? All of that, you want to make sure that you have this information readily available. So I had mentioned, with one of the reasons this has really come up and become a topic of interest recently, is both the public spotlight, but then from a regulatory standpoint, EGLE has had some changes to how we do our work that has also paid a little bit more attention when it comes to cross connections. And what you're looking at here on this side is, a few years ago, we updated our sanitary survey process to where before it had really been this kind of report looking packet where we were doing a bunch of fill in the blanks, trying to record information down, to where we transitioned to this checklist style, this different format, with the hope of being more consistent across all of our districts, and as well as trying to be thorough on the information we were trying to collect. Depending on the answers we get, we might cite recommendations, deficiencies, or significant deficiencies. And what we've seen happen is we did have a jump. It was partway through 2018 where we first started rolling out some of these checklists, a jump in the number of citations that we had regarding cross connections. You can see where for several years prior, we were hovering around 20, I'll call it, to then in our some of our recent years, once the checklist came out, we about tripled that number. We've been somewhere around 60 of these citations per year. And it's really just going to be attributed to where we have just trying to be more thorough, trying to be more consistent, and we're making sure that we're looking on these. What this doesn't break down is for the deficiencies, is it that we're just not performing our cross-connection prevention work? Do we just have incomplete or missing records for some of that? Or is it that maybe things aren't being seen completely all the way through, where maybe we have inspections and testing being done, but then we're not fixing, say, malfunctioning devices, or we're not having corrective action taken? These deficiencies could be coming from various points throughout that process. This is just the lump sum total that there are issues we're looking to get corrected. And again, some of the questions that we have been asking are going to be things like, are all account classes being addressed? And this includes residential, and residential has really been one of the sticking points. Are inspections being done across all of these account classes? And then, is testing being done across all of these account classes? When we're looking for this term adequate coming up, is basically we want to be seeing, is a real effort being put forth by the water system? Are we seeing problems being fixed? One of the things I had mentioned when we looked at that annual reporting exercise yesterday, we're not expecting things to be perfect every single year. There will be, unexpected surprises that come up within your system. Just the workload is going to shift from year to year, whether it's stuff the water system's trying to accomplish, you've got varying levels of manpower, whatever the reasons are. We're just, again, looking for, is the system following through? Are they doing what they can to help address the cross-connection risk in their water system? And then these questions being asked, they're the same across all of the water systems that we regulate in the state. So this could be, say, a condo association of 12.5 units. This could be a city of 300,000. They're going to be asked the same questions. It's just a different scale of what are we expecting to actually have evidence of being done. But it's the same general responsibilities of, are you taking care of these different parts of the program? So then just a reminder of what we have with backflow. It's we went over all of this yesterday, but again, it's just when we have this, in this case, a picture of our house, an example of water of basically an unknown quality or something where we can have a contaminant or pollutant introduced coming back to our public water system. It's not the normal circumstance of we're delivering water to our customer. Instead, this customer, this point of use, is sending water back to us. And again, there can be health risks posed by it. Maybe it's just aesthetics, but it's really all in all not a situation that we want to have taking place. And examples of maybe from some of these residential sites we can see is we had the example of what we're calling bugs. We had the nematodes from the one case study. It can be general bacteria, sewage. If they've got irrigation systems, you might have like fertilizers or herbicides, any cleaning chemicals or antifreeze, a whole bunch of different things used at these sites. One example of one such risk is just going to be a hose bib. And if someone leaves a hose connected on it, it's a relatively simple fix. Having the hose bib vacuum breaker placed on it, it will break the siphon occurring. You won't have the flow getting sucked all the way back into the plumbing and potentially sent to your system. But if you find this, that still counts as a cross connection that you found. And if this vacuum breaker is placed on it, you fixed it. It still counts towards your tally. We're protecting the water system. One of the things to consider for some of the places where they've got the vacuum breaker is it's not, sometimes it's not just as simple as I put something on it, there, it's over with. You want to make sure, do you have a potential freezing concern that could damage that vacuum breaker? Are we going to have tampering concerns? Sometimes you might come back to a place and you might find where that vacuum breaker that was put on there might now have been removed. We might also have things downstream, like a valve or sometimes these nozzles that you can put on to help put down fertilizer or some of these other chemicals. These have another valve that can then put pressure going back on that vacuum breaker, which, depending on the style, might actually prevent it from functioning properly now. So those are all things that are going to have to be looked at. Another common residential risk is going to be lawn irrigation. So again, here we see a pressure vacuum breaker installed. This is typically how we want to see it being installed, but just like anything else, we want to make sure, is this being tested? Was it even installed properly in the first place? And again, some of those things we had discussed, this should always be vertical. We want to make sure it's got at least that 12-inch above the highest point of use out in the irrigation system. So say if it's a really large irrigation system, if they have it going up any kind of hill, or some people will do like those, tiers, or maybe a decorative wall that they have something going up, that all has to be considered in, will this pressure vacuum breaker be able to function properly? And then these are one of the ones that often have winterizing considerations, where I've seen it, they're left over the winter, maybe they weren't drained, and if they freeze up, some of the pipe might get damaged, valves might get damaged, or the spring itself might get locked up or might get knocked loose. All of these are things that can lead it to where it is no longer functioning properly and is not protecting your water system. You might also see various kind of sinks, both in the household maybe some of these, work tubs or utility sinks. These are all ones kind of similar to the hose bibs, where we want to make sure on either an air gap, or then if they do have a vacuum breaker put on it, is able to function properly. You don't know what they might have been using some of these sinks for. So again, we want to make sure either with the flood rim and air gap, is that being maintained properly, or for some styles, there will be a vacuum breaker right on the sink. One of the things you really want to double check on is for these ones that have a extendable hose or a sprayer, or where other people have maybe added an attachment onto it, is that going to change how the protection that was in place is functioning? For example, one of these extendable faucets, if they leave it extended and it's now down in the sink, well, now if there was an air gap in place, that's not going to function for you anymore. Scott had also spent a little bit of time yesterday talking about with toilets. We're not necessarily saying that you have to check every single toilet in your community, but it is one thing to keep in mind, particularly with maybe older homes that might have older toilets in. Just over time, if the settings on these have been changed, so you're not getting the separation you're supposed to have, or maybe it didn't have one of these anti-siphon devices in it. This is just stuff to think about when you're going about having inspections done, or when you're asking homeowners, just, what potentially they might be in the house. And some of the other general risks we won't focus on with this presentation is you might have in-home treatment taking place, often in the shape of softeners. Other places might have additional filters or things there. There's water-assisted sump pumps. They might have a boiler within the property, pools or jacuzzis, as well as then some household appliances. There is overlap within the Act 399 administrative rules and the that recognizes the Michigan Plumbing Code, and basically that, again, the requirements from that plumbing code needs to be met too. So that's potentially another resource, another tool that you can make use of if you're trying to get things fixed, or you have people objecting to it, where it's now not just us coming from the Safe Drinking Water Act and not just the cross-connection program that you have developed for your water system, but also this plumbing code that is saying this is how things need to be done, or that they can't, or that you can't have certain things on the potable water. So just to be aware of that is out there. And in general, in addition to, we've got the plumbing code, again, we've got the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's part 14 that is specific to cross connections. You'll have from the EPA has their cross connection manual. The American Water Works Association, they have a cross connection manual. We have our own rules manual, which is very much due for an update. We're aware of that, and it's one of the things on our schedule, but that you can make use of. ASSE has their guidelines. All of these are going to have more information for you to make use of. I know at least with our rules manual, it has some templates and stuff included of it that you might be able to make use of, or examples of different things that you might see. These are all things out there that you can either use to help both develop your cross connection program from the start, as well as then as you're actually trying to use your program, you're actually out there doing the work. Again, this is all information you can make use of. There's other things to consider if you want to look at them as kind of partners in cross connection and backflow interest and protection. Obviously, both because they can prevent a risk, but then also we can head things off with them if we do things properly and are coordinated. You've got fire suppression, irrigation, and then really these kind of chemical dispensing cleaning industries. If done improperly, yes, they can be problems for your system. If we can get everything right from the start, we don't have to worry necessarily about that same level of risk, or we can feel more comfortable and more confident that we are addressing things before they ever become a problem. And then some of the common vendors that we'll see as far as these backflow preventers, some of the other cross-connection prevention services, you have Watts, Fedco, Zurn, Apollo. I know there's probably quite a few more out there. Just like you can purchase products from them, you might be able to just ask them a quick, like, hey, we've encountered this. How are we supposed to fix this? How are we supposed to address this? Again, these are all people, we all are in the interest of trying to protect our water quality and make sure that the drinking water is safe. And that's really, if you want, we're using the word sales pitch, if that's how you want to view it, but that's really the angle we want to take when it's coming to try to address some of these problems, is that this really is, it's to protect people's health, both the actual customer at the property, we're seeing a problem. You're also trying to protect their neighbors. It really is just in the interest of public health is why we're doing this. That's, why you're out there. It's why you would like them to cooperate with you, why these inspections are being done, why it's important that testing is done properly. It is in their interest to try to see this all done correctly. And then also when it comes to potentially backflow events occurring, or if they've got, leaks, problems with faulty plumbing, they're going to be going through more water. Depending on the billing system that's set up, that could be costing them more just right there. And also this faulty plumbing could lead to that increased risk of backflow and potentially exposing them to some of these problems. It could be like if they've got a broken toilet, basically it keeps running through water. If they've got these vacuum breakers, say out on their hose bibs or something, that are just spitting water or spilling stuff, it's not, at that point, if they're not really feeling the health risk aspect of it, well, maybe they're going to care about the cost of it. That is money that is literally draining away. So some tips for success on trying to have a successful cross-connection program, and particularly with getting it implemented for your residential customers. Public education can be huge. Just getting people to understand what is being done and why can go a long way. I know I have received phone calls from customers asking, they might sound, in some cases they sound distraught or upset, confused, whatever it is, but they want to know, there's people from the water system here and they're saying that they're here to do this. Is this real? And I can walk things through with them, explain it. And a lot of times that's all it takes is a simple explanation, and they are much more comfortable at the end of the phone call that this is a real task, a real exercise that you're doing, and that it's to their benefit. So whether you do this just coming up on your own materials, you have something posted on your website, maybe you send something out with your consumer confidence report, however you choose to deliver that message, maybe you even go so far as if you host events, if you have maybe like a public works day where people get to see, if you show off, if you've got any fancy equipment you want the public to know about, you have examples of, the work that you actually do. It's, again, just to get people to see, one, what are their taxes actually accomplishing, and two, what do you do? How is it helping them? I had mentioned earlier this kind of survey or questionnaire approach. Just getting them to see that gets them thinking about, what are some of these risks presented? How can we help try to prevent or reduce some of these problems? And then with that, if you're actually having that face-to-face interaction, again, just simple conversations, being willing to answer some of their questions or explain things to them can really help. And then the other thing that maybe once some of that interest or trust has been gained is just being consistent with your messages and being consistent with your work. It's you're not going, don't give people special exemptions if it's not appropriate. Don't treat people differently just because if it's one of those that one place all you had to do was walk in and in 5 minutes you got to check one or two things and it's done. Whereas another place, maybe you have to be there for an hour to get through everything. Just being consistent with all of it can help keep some of that trust once it's been gained. And then really then the final messages we want to have there is when it comes to your residential cross connection program and really your cross connection program at large, is it covering all of your counts, including residential? And then has that been submitted to EGLE for review and approval? Do you have a functional record keeping system? And then, are you again able to have that information available if you need to go back and check things or have follow-up? Are inspections being done? And both, are they being completed? And is it being completed at least close to your target schedule? Like I said, we're not expecting it to be perfect every year, but we also don't want to see where you were supposed to get to 100 customers and you got to 10 of them. Is testing being completed for any assemblies that you have out there? Are you actually enforcing on these findings? So if you're finding if things are missing, are they broken? Is that being corrected? And then do you have a strategy for education? Again, just when it comes to this public outreach, are you prepared if people have questions? Are you prepared on how to share some of this information? So people know what's going on. So with that comes to the conclusion of our residential cross connection programs presentation. We'll have a little bit of time here for if there's any questions out there. And then if there's no questions or once we answer those, we can take a short break before getting into our next presentation.
Okay, Bob, I'm not seeing any questions or any hands raised at the moment. What kind of a time frame do you want to do for a break?
Well, I'll top Scott's 6-minute break from yesterday. I have 9:52 right now. I'm gonna go ahead. It feels like a lucky number. Let's do a 13-minute break. We'll come back at 10:05 and get started because I want to make sure we can get through all the examples in our common hazards and facilities presentation.
Okay, 13-minute
we'll plan
break.
to come back
All
at
right.
10:05.
right, Bob, we are back. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll let you get yours brought up, and then we'll run that next poll question.
All right, that sounds good. Let's get back to, here we are.
All right, we see you ready to go.
Yep, so if you want to get the second poll question, we'll keep things rolling.
All right, so you should see on your screen right now, would you recommend this course? So we are offering a lot of courses in a virtual format, and we are always interested in your feedback. Do you like the virtual option that EGLE is providing? And so we appreciate you taking a moment to answer this question. And if you are looking to get continuing education credits, then this would be the second question we have asked. So 87%, I'll let this run a little bit longer. All right, so at 1 minute, we have had a 93% response rate. So what I'm going to do is end this poll. And then we'll turn it over to you, Bob. And Bob, just to give you the numbers on this. We've got 120 people that like this format and 2 people that don't.
All right, thanks, Matt. And then also just, we always appreciate comments and feedback on these courses too. If everyone has ways they think we could either improve what we do, or if there are parts of the course you appreciated. For this last presentation we have is our basic cross connections seminar. We're going to be focusing on what are some common hazards and facilities to inspect. There's quite a few slides with this presentation. I will do my best to keep us on time, try to make sure there is an opportunity for questions at the end. The good news is this presentation is almost entirely some photos and real world examples. So I hope these are very practical and beneficial for all of you, as far as what might you actually be seeing if you get out there to do some of this cross connection work. So the very first thing we're going to be talking about is chemical dispensers. We had touched on these a little bit yesterday, and we wanted to give these really their whole own little group in this presentation, because there's a lot of these out there and you can see them in a lot of different places. So in this case, and you'll see them in the next several slides, but the chemical dispenser is this kind of tan looking box. It's got all the different colored stickers sitting up above the sink here. So what a chemical dispenser is basically, it comes, and whether where we have this jug of some fluid, presumably some chemical, with a hose coming up to the dispenser, is at just the press of a button, it is automatically going to give you whatever it's plugged into, and whether, say, it's some kind of sanitizing solution, some kind of solvent, basically whatever fluid chemical that you're plugged into, flip of a switch, you're going to get a dose of that for whatever you need. So in this case, we have a guy filling his mop bucket. There's a bunch of different kinds of dispensers out there, a few different brands, and a lot of times these are things that are going to be installed after most of the construction's done, and really after we might have people on site. So these are really things that need to be looked at when we have again, this cross-connection personnel coming back to the properties. There are two types of approved dispensers when it comes to backflow prevention. They should be labeled on the outside with the sticker that will either say ASSE 1055A or ASSE 1055B. And what the difference is that an A dispenser is going to have a dedicated water supply that basically terminates with something that isn't going to be a hose thread. One of those spigots that you can, basically screw things on or off. 1055B is generally going to be connected to a janitor sink faucet. And it's going to have some kind of, there's a few different names for them. You'll see a wasting tee, pressure bleeding device, flow diverter. Basically, it's just something that keeps pressure from building up within the hose line. So this is an actual cutaway of one of those chemical dispensers. Basically, we've taken its plastic shell off. And the way that they're designed is you've got your water supply coming in this case, the gray hose. And then we have these built-in air gaps that are internal to the unit. So any of them that have one of those ASSE stickers, this is what the inside looks like. It's got these manufactured air gaps that are included right in it. That is its backflow prevention. It feeds the chemical, the clear little hoses with the red nipples or attachments here is where the chemical comes in and is basically fed through a Venturi effect. The water flowing down the hose is pulling chemical into that water stream. So this is an example of an actual, if you want to think like a janitor's closet or something like that, where we have the dispenser is from this one black hose that's coming down and connected to the faucet. So it's sitting up above where we have our sink here. And in this case, we're calling it a sidekick valve, but it's what we've got this hose screwed into on the side. And then you see there's still this kind of plastic attachment sticking down below it. That's what's basically going to allow this to discharge water without building pressure back up the hose line. And actually, this sink itself has an atmospheric vacuum breaker included on it. So we've actually should have a certified chemical dispenser up above it. We have an atmospheric vacuum breaker here. There is one problem with the setup. If anyone caught it, or you're reading the labels on this picture, is if you look, there are actually two hose bibs. The one's kind of blocked by the larger faucet, but then if you look to the left, you see one, it's got a red handle on it, that are installed upstream of the atmospheric vacuum breaker. Well, that's a problem, because now for those specific hose bibs and wherever we have those hoses going, have now basically bypassed our backflow prevention. So in this case, the chemical dispenser setup is correct, but those hose bibs are not in the right place with regards to that vacuum breaker. So this is another one of those chemical dispensers, again, being cut away, just showing you that in general, they might look a little different when you open them up, but their setups are very similar. Again, we have an approved built-in air gap that is part of the dispenser. And then actually on the left side of this slide, then there's a picture of, again, you shouldn't have to open these up when you're checking them. If they're an approved device, they should have some kind of sticker or stamp right on their side. So at a glance, you should be able to take a look at these and have an idea, is this good or not? Is it acceptable? If it's missing that marking, you may need to open it up then to check, does it have these air gaps? Does everything look like it's set up? But most of the time, it will not be that complicated. So again, on those type B devices, we talked about it had this pressure bleeding device that's required to be installed with it. This is an example of one of those devices. And the reason for that, that this is necessary is because when this is attached to the faucet, if you recall this picture that we had here, it has this atmospheric vacuum breaker on it. Normally, this cannot have a valve downstream of it. So you need this bleed through device to prevent that, basically to avoid having that problem of a valve that is shutting things off and creating that back pressure. So again, you'd have your chemical dispenser hose would be coming in on the side here, and then this bleed through is for the benefit of the vacuum breaker. So again, that's what we're actually seeing here is one of these wasting tees that has been installed on one of these faucets. And now in this case, we actually have a splitter with two different hoses coming in. But again, this wasting tee is protecting the vacuum breaker that's installed with the faucet. So we've gotten examples of, again, some more chemical dispensers here. This one is actually in a kitchen at a fast food restaurant. So again, these are all over the place. In this case, we're looking at a hose that is connected into the sink here. It does not need a wasting tee because there is not an atmospheric vacuum breaker included here, and there's not a threaded faucet that we could actually be attaching things to. So at least in this picture, we don't see the atmospheric vacuum breaker, but because it does not have that threaded hose bib or a threaded faucet, they cannot be attaching valves downstream of it. So that's why things are okay. If it had that threaded connection, that's where we would have to specifically look for that 1055B. And then this is just the picture on the side. Again, where in this one, it actually has open sides on it. So again, you can just peek in and see the air gaps that are included with it. On this setup, again, this looks like this is at a actual wastewater treatment plant. In this case, we've got our chemical dispenser up above. Again, it's tapped into the splitter that's off the hose. And in this case, we actually have an issue with that splitter because we have all of this connected and we currently don't have a wasting tee that is included with this. So this little mushroom looking thing, again, on the faucet, that's the atmospheric vacuum breaker. It is not going to work correctly in this case because we now have these valves downstream and we're putting continuous pressure back against that vacuum breaker. If you recall the atmospheric one, that was just a little float or plug mounted in there, didn't have a spring or anything to backload it. So if it gets back pressure against it, it's just getting pushed out of the way. So one of the next things, and you might encounter these, some of your other businesses out there, some of your various customers, this is something that might be seen at residences, but you'll see a water powered or a water assisted sump pump. We're basically, what normally happens is that the sump pump will operate on its own, but if you lose power and the sump starts to fill up, it is actually able to use potable water then to flow through this little loop. We have an arrow pointing out a Venturi discharge. Just like the chemical dispensers, it basically uses that flow of your potable water to create that Venturi effect, to create some suction to now start pulling things and get your sump pump operating. Because it has that potential interaction between the pump's discharge and now your potable water supply, you want to have a backflow preventer on this, so you aren't taking from whatever is in that sump accidentally being put back into your potable water. So most of the time, a sump like this is going to be considered a high hazard risk, just because we don't have control over what might be draining to or collecting in that sump. So this is another example showing with, on the left, we kind of have that cutaway side view of generally how this sump is going to function. And then on the right is the actual crock down in the sump. Just so, again, you get a picture of how these are going to look generally. And so really it's when it comes down to treating these, again, normally you're going to have a RPZ if on the water line, and then if the what's being called here is the educator, again, basically with when we're triggering and trying to get this flow going for the water assistance on the sump, if it's in line with that and basically still a common discharge, you still need the RPZ. The one difference is going to be if there's a separate discharge pipe or multiple separate discharge pipes. So basically the potable water is going to get the sump going, but never is actually connected to or exposed to the sump's discharge line, when it's actually going to start emptying out of the sump. In that case, you can have a PVB. Again, it needs to be located 6 inches above whatever the highest point on that discharge line is. So that would be the one exception to whether an RPZ is going to be considered the necessary assembly or not. The next potential risk is actually air conditioners, at least for some air conditioners. Depending on the models, there are going to be some that have water flowing through them, kind of acting as a heat exchanger for how the unit functions. We have examples of heat exchangers on the next slide. With the design, the protection between your actual flow of water, and then again, with this heat exchanger, it's okay if it's only a single wall protection, as long as there is non-toxic transfer fluid or you have a high hazard backflow preventer in place. Some of these units might have a double wall protection that includes leak detection to let them know if that interior wall has failed. That is also acceptable. Anything that is using these exchangers, so like your air conditioners, cooling towers, drinking fountains, ice machines, water-cooled engines, things like that, these are all possible risks for this heat exchanger setup. And again, just then to have an example of, on the left is obviously a picture of an actual heat exchanger. On the right is showing how the internal mechanics of these look. Basically, what's happening is you have, for the example of this diagram, this plate collector, where basically is going to be collecting heat. We've got antifreeze fluid in a collector loop only, but then you can see how this pipe for that antifreeze, how it's going in, it has this coil inside of a water heater. And in this case, they have it double walled, so we can live with that. If it was single walled, we would need to make sure that we have a backflow preventer for this water heater, because there would be a risk of this antifreeze fluid getting into your potable water supply. The picture on the left is actually from an ice maker, and this one is actually using an air gap, and then they have this plate to help hold the potable water line, filling this up in place, so that if this were to, for some reason, overfill, it's going to spill out of this basin and make a mess. It won't actually get back into the plumbing. The next item we have to discuss is aspirators, which is basically these cones looking on each of these spigots. These are at risk of back siphonage. And with the aspirators, the most common way that you might see these is going to be like with these little cones, these attachments. But actually, there's this weed be gone. That's another thing. It's an aspirator. If this was left on the end of a hose, this is presenting a backflow risk. Whatever is being contained within that jug could get pulled back from back siphonage. With these left on I'm assuming this is over some kind of sink, any attachments, if they had hoses or plugged into something else, whether it was down into the sink, if they had buckets or maybe bottles of something, again, from back siphonage, it could get pulled back up through these connections into the water supply. So wherever these are present, you should have some means of backflow prevention so that back siphonage is not pulling things back up through these aspirators. In this case, there's an auxiliary water supply, and this is specifically talking about the example of private wells. This is where they're going to have, they might, whether you call it auxiliary, secondary, backup, there's basically a different water system, a different source that is interconnected with our public water supply. This can be a problem, whether if there's back pressure, if whatever they have for that source from a pump or whatever's providing the water might potentially overpressurize or exceed what our public water system has and is going to push water into our public water system, or if it just might be a questionable source. It's not going to be subject to the same monitoring that we do with our public system. It might not be receiving the same kinds of treatment. There could be various different things that cause problems. Either way, this is water of a quality that we do not want to have getting back into our public water system. Really, just the best case scenario when this happens, it's best to just disconnect them if at all possible. We don't want to have an interface in between them. In this case, what we have shown here is actually two physically disconnected systems. The dark blue plumbing that we see is part of a potable water system. The white plumbing and then the small hydropneumatic tank that's off on the side is for an irrigation system. They're not interconnected. If there was to be an interconnection, again, you're looking at an RPZ. Just you don't want to take any risks with it. But again, the best course of action is just to keep these entirely physically separate. So this is always a fun one to bring up because a lot of people might not think of these ones. But bait shops and pet stores are another potential cross-connection risk. Because if it comes down to looking at it, if they've got aquariums, if they've got their bait tanks on stuff, that water needs to come from somewhere. And if they're one of your customers, it's coming from your public water supply. So in this case, we're looking at the left, we can see it's at a bait shop. They've got a bunch of stuff under the counter here that's basically, they've got two tubs that they've been keeping minnows in. And then we've got an overhead shot looking down into that tub. Now, if anyone has a guess at what the issue is here. It's that we've got these, again, spigots where we're filling up these sinks, these tanks are down below the flood rim. So these are definitely going to get submerged. And the issue with the setup is it was claimed to be installed with a anti-siphon device. The problem is that this anti-siphon device is located down below the flood rim. So this is basically an improper installation. When this is filled up, if it gets over the spigots, it is basically at risk of a backflow event occurring. And in this specific case, being with the that they're keeping bait here, it's basically we're keeping animals. If one of those were to die just from the waste that they produce, we basically have biohazard problems here, and this would actually require an RPZ to separate the bait tanks from the potable water supply. At beauty salons, you'll see, they have all these sinks. They're going through rinsing hairs, doing whatever, if dyeing, shampooing, whatever they're using. We've got various chemicals that could be applied. And in this case, we also have this hose that's been left down into the sink as a submerged inlet. In this case, that hose, if we follow it going back down through, you can see there's a little U-shape, a little loop down below the sink, is protected by a vacuum breaker. But that's something you want to check to make sure that protection is in place. If that wasn't there, the submerged inlet would not be acceptable. That would be a cross-connection risk. And in this case, the flood rim, again, is the top of this sink, which we can't assume that this little dip in the sink's rim where they let people, you can lean back and rest your head on it. We can't assume that that's what sets the flood rim. Boilers were one of the problems, or one of the potential sources of cross-connection issues that we had mentioned in our presentations yesterday. As a reminder, there you can come across both treated boilers and untreated boilers. When it's treated, it does require an RPZ. We're facing potential for back pressure to be occurring when we've had this chemical being added to it. We don't want to take any chances. Untreated is going to have to either be a double check valve assembly or the RPZ. Again, just because now maybe we don't have that same chemical risk, but we are still facing the potential for back pressure. The in this case, on these pictures on the left was the protection that was in place. Might be a little difficult to see, but on that lower line, there's a little support rod coming up to it. We have a Watts backflow preventer. Basically, it's a vented double check valve. The issue with that is that that would only be acceptable with a untreated boiler. Well, as it turns out, in that same room, they found this barrel that might be a little difficult to read, but under that BSP2, it says right on the label, boiler treatment. That really doesn't leave a whole lot of room for doubt. So that's where, when you're at some of these cases, you need to look for context clues sometimes. In this case, just at a glance on the left, you might think, oh, this double check valve might be appropriate if you think it's just a untreated boiler. But then with looking around, doing some investigation, we found signs that treatment might actually be occurring. That double check valve is not going to be acceptable. In a similar example, again, just you can look around and explore a little bit. We've got a boiler room. We see the unit is in the middle here. Well, if we peek around, whether you're just wanting to know, oh, well, what's that on the wall? Or if you're following some of this plumbing around, there's a might find in this case, it's a very clear chemical application point. It's basically, they've got the funnel. That's where they're going to be pouring in like their anti-scaling or whatever other treatment they're adding into the water. You really don't have any room for doubt here. That's a treated boiler process. Booster pumps Again, these are going to be causing problems where, depending on how they're set or if they start to malfunction, they can cause, again, back pressure issues, where we're going to be raising the pressure at our customer sites. And if that isn't being checked properly, this could actually be pushing water back out into our public water system. So this is one of those things, and in this case, whether it's someone might have done it themselves at home, it might be at a business somewhere. These are things where you're going to be looking for, how are these set to operate? And then again, making sure that between where they have this booster set up and where we have our public water system, or the potable water supply, we want to have backflow prevention in place. One of the ones, in terms of the complexity or the amount of things that we're going to have to protect against, that's kind of towards the top of the list, is going to be car washes. I don't know if anyone has had a chance to actually kind of see the behind the curtain of a car wash. There is a lot that is going on back there. A lot of times there is a whole variety of chemicals that you're going to be seeing being applied, various soaps, rinses, drying agents, waxes, polishes, things like that. As well as then they might need pumping systems to get the pressures that they need for some of the different machinery, whether it's the nozzles, various sprays, to actually work properly. So this is an example from back behind a car wash. We actually have a few pictures here of, we've got, again, some of those chemical dispensers that is going to be feeding from these drums. These are presumably some of the different, again, soaps or drying agents that they're using, but are then setting them up through the treatment system. Looking at these car washes, you can have whole galleries of these treatment pumps and everything. So these are one of the ones where you're really going to have to make the call. Do you try to prevent every point of use, or do you maybe walk things back a little bit? And is there just a point where you've got some common plumbing that goes to all of these, where maybe we can just drop in a single RPZ and basically just contain all these different treatment processes? Again, that's going to be a decision that you make as a water system, as the supplier, and you might have some discussion with this property owner to decide what is everyone most comfortable with, what's going to be your most practical way to protect this business. You also have the potential, they might have a bunch of these utility sinks and stuff too. In this case, you want to make sure that we don't have an issue with submerged inlets. Do you need to have vacuum breakers in place? Are air gaps being maintained with flood rims? There's a whole bunch to look at. And in this case, you want another look down the gallery. They also have these water softener assemblies. Now, of course, you can see water softeners in a bunch of different other applications. But one of the things, again, you're just wanting to make sure is, depending on the water softener and what they're using with that, it's entirely possible that might be using resins or chemicals in it that you do not want to have getting back into your public water supply. Similarly, if they've got water heaters, boilers, that's all stuff that you want to be aware of. So as we can see from this picture, there's a lot going on with this car wash. Between, we have, again, our chemical dispensers with all these, tubs or barrels of chemical below them. We were seeing where we had the sinks. We wanted to worry about submerged inlets. We've got some water softening taking place. So what they ended up doing with this property, and the decision you'll have to make, is they just put RPZs right there with the service line coming into the business. So, there are considerations to take in terms of what is going to be most appropriate with this customer. Sometimes one single action is not going to be the single best, or if you want to consider it, the right action to take for all of your customers. There's some that are going to be very simple, some that are going to be very complex. It's up to us as the water system operators, as the people performing backflow prevention, to make the decisions on where are different measures appropriate. Another thing you'll see, this is usually going to be at different restaurants, things like that, is for your carbonated beverage dispensers. Basically, that's the fancy name. You go up to your pop machines, put your cup up under it, and it shoots out whatever you've chosen to fill the cup. Within it, the way it works is it's going to mix water from your water supply. It has the flavored syrups in it, and then carbon dioxide to get that carbonation. Carbon dioxide can be a problem on its own, and that's where basically it will start to corrode copper. And for any of you who are familiar with our lead and copper rules, you do not want to have big excesses of copper potentially getting back into your water system. So these dispensers do need to be protected against. That being said, a lot of these do have, at least more modern ones, do have integrated devices that are built right in as part of their assembly. So this is a diagram of basically spelling out how it's done. You've got your water supply coming in, has an internal filter, puts it through a pump. At that point, it puts it through a backflow preventer, where then you actually then get into your carbonator, and then it sends stuff down for beverage dispensing. So again, this is a look on the left here. We can see we've got a few of our different carbonated products. That's what we're talking about. And then inside of it, we actually took the back off of one. This is a ASSE 1022 being required in this case when they looked closer. And this is why you do need to pay attention to what labels are on it. Sometimes you have to take a closer look. This was actually a 1032, which was basically a predecessor. It used to be acceptable, was not acceptable anymore. So you do need to pay attention to with some of the labels and what the machine is put with. So with these carbonated beverage dispensers, you want to see an ASSE 1022 approved device. It's a backflow preventer. It's made so that it's non-corrosive, that will protect your system against these carbonated dispensers. And then on this next page, we have an example of some of these kind of internalized units. So again, it's a ASSE 1012 on the top, and then a 1022 on the bottom. The biggest difference between these, and what makes a difference in how they're being used, is that the top one, the 1012, you can obviously tell it's metallic, whether this is brass or whatever it's made of, that can be corroded, and that would not function properly with these dispensers. The 1022, whether it's we've got some stainless, it's plastics, it's made so that it is not corrodable. We're trying to protect it against some of this stuff, so that'll make sure it doesn't just wear away over the time and potentially malfunction. So again, some of our other beverage dispensers, things like coffee makers, things like that. The 2006 plumbing code update required, again, that it has that 1022 double check valve assembly. It was not called out in previous versions of the plumbing code. So we've got this final note here, depending on when it was installed, it may or may not need to have this assembly included within it. This is going to be one of those things, as more time passes, We're going to see more of these machines phased out. It should be more and more of these newer ones that do need and should have the 1022 included with it. Cooling towers. So this is going to be dependent on, sometimes you have places of business. A lot of times these are seen, again, very large buildings, hospitals, things like that. These are potential problem areas when it comes to backflow, and have actually been kind of notorious in a couple of examples. Is the reservoir they sit in. It's kind of difficult to see, but the picture on the right, looking through the cage, it's sitting in this reservoir where there's standing water. You can have a lot of kind of nasty stuff potentially growing in there. That makes this is a high hazard problem. It's either going to need to have an RPZ established on it or an air gap in place. Nothing else is going to be acceptable levels of protection for this. And the reason I'm saying these have gotten a little bit notorious is that it has generally been in these kind of cooling towers where Legionella has been found to really grow and really seems to like it in some of these reservoirs. So that's when we've heard of some of these examples of some Legionella outbreaks and stuff. A lot of times it's tracked back to these pieces of equipment. So this is definitely one that we want to make sure is being properly protected against. Anytime you're looking at decorative ponds or fountains, again, it's a question of where is the water coming from? And that's really the theme that hopefully you've started to notice as we're going around and when we're performing these inspections, is if you're seeing anything that it's an endpoint, it's a use of water, it's just where is it coming from? Because if it's coming from your public water system, we want to make sure that whatever this end use case is, we're being properly, we're making sure it's properly protected. So again, you might see these a lot of times people out if they're doing any kind of landscaping or gardening. Sometimes in malls they'll have indoors. They'll have some of these big fountain setups or airports. Again, if it's connected to your water supply and if these are kind of open to the environment, we don't know how these are being taken care of or what might be getting into them. We have so there was an example actually from 2014. There's a village that was struggling with some BACT positives, total coliform positives. And what had happened is a hose had been connected to a yard hydrant and run out to one of these fountains to fill it up. So normally the fountain was actually separated, but the hose had been left in place while the fountain was filling and actually ended up getting flooded. Its outlet ended up being below the water level. The next morning when they came back to the fountain, it was completely empty. And basically what happened is while that fountain had been left to fill, the fire department went out to do some exercises and was using their pumper truck, and it actually caused a localized depressurization and pulled all of the water out of that fountain back into the system. And that was where some of the coliform detects started coming from. So, some of those, you think it's like, wow, it would be a 1 in a million chance. It would really take some pretty odd or unique circumstances for this to happen. Well, they do happen sometimes. And that's what we're trying to protect against. Fire suppression systems have been one of the pretty common examples that we've been bringing up in our previous discussions. They can be considered high hazard if there is some kind of chemical additive. A lot of times these are going to be antifreezes to prevent any of the building plumbing from freezing up. You may also want to consider them high hazard if they have these exterior pump connections, and if you know that your fire department either uses additives or potentially draws from surface water. Because what could happen then if you have these exterior pumper connections is that if there's additives left in the tanks of one of these pumper trucks, or if they've been drawing from surface water, and if anything was left from that, that could potentially get introduced to your potable water supply then when they hook up. Really, the exception to this then is going to be as if you've got no chemical additives, and if the fire department's policy is that they only use, again, potable water without any additives with their trucks. If that's the case, you might be able to consider these low hazard and use a double check valve. That's going to be where coordination with your local fire department is really going to be important. So in this case, we have a fire suppression system, and it is being protected with a RPZ. Again, one of those things that Scott had shared previously when he was going through our different types of backflow preventers. The easiest and quickest way to tell apart if something is a double check valve or an RPZ is going to be the little additional port or vent that comes with the RPZ, where it can discharge in the event that backflow occurs. Again, a double check valve would not have this relief port on the bottom. But so in this case, we've got our potable water supply in the dark blue, the RPZ was installed, and then we have our white plumbing, which is the actual fire suppression then going beyond it through the building. So from that picture, though, there was one issue that we found with the RPZ setup, and it's what we've got centered in this picture right here. Normally, you would expect to see some of these additional attachments on with the, the RPZ or testable assemblies. There are test ports. What happened here is someone actually took one of those test ports and they swapped it out for a hose bib. The reason that's a problem is now if someone is using it like a hose bib and connecting to it, we are now basically introducing a new opportunity for a cross connection to occur. And now we've removed one of the test ports, so we can't be checking to see if this RPZ is functioning correctly. So again, these are the kind of things that you can catch, and why it's important to physically get out there and look at some of these places. So in this case, we have a double check valve that is being used with the fire system. Again, we can look at that real quick. There's no relief port with it. This, again, is an acceptable setup to protect a fire suppression system if the local fire department does not use additives and they only use potable water when filling their trucks. If any of that changes, or if there any of that is in doubt, there should be an RPZ that's put in place. So here we have another fire suppression system. And then again, we've got the whole assembly here. You can see how it's splitting out and around. And then in this case, it looks like there may be an external hookup just outside the building here. And then we've got an assembly helping to separate some of that. One of the things you're going to want to double check is just where is the assembly going to be in relation to where we have other plumbing split off. In this case, it's difficult to tell from the picture, but there's a potable water line, and we need to see, depending on where that's plumbed, where the fire suppression is plumbed from, are things actually being protected with where the backflow preventer is. This is another fire suppression system, and the issue with this one is that this fire suppression system only has a single check valve on it, which is not a recognized backflow preventer. There were a lot of systems, fire suppression systems, that were installed like this, just because that's how previous versions of the plumbing code is what they called for, and it's what they allowed. These are things that should be getting updated and replaced as opportunities come up when they're making any improvements or adjustments to the fire suppression system. When that time comes about, this should be either a double check valve or an RPZ that gets installed in its place. What you need to double check is to make sure with that new backflow preventer going in, hydraulically, is that still going to be functional with the fire suppression system? If you have too much of a pressure drop or pressure loss that occurs with the new backflow preventer going in, the fire suppression system might not work as intended. We have talked about lawn irrigation systems. Again, another one we've hit on a lot. These are typically going to be considered high hazard, just for the possibility of, again, fertilizers, herbicides, insecticides, things like that being added, as well as then just like on this picture on the right, we'll circle it. That's a sprinkler head sitting at the bottom of a puddle. Depending on what runoff is occurring, if there might be like animal waste or anything that's getting drained down to here, that's all stuff that could get sucked back into the lawn irrigation system. So again, when it comes to backflow prevention, cross connection control, when in doubt, you always want to play things on the safe side. Let's go ahead, put in the more protective measure. We had talked about with some of the hose bibs, there's a few different things that can all get placed on it. These are all things that can be added onto one of these hose bibs that may not have appropriate measures of protection. They all basically function in similar ways. They're all just going to be a atmospheric vacuum breaker. They just, as you can tell, they're just either, you know, mounted or integrated in a couple different spots. Again, with all of these being atmospheric vacuum breakers, they should not have any downstream valves. They cannot be subject to continuous pressure. So that's stuff when it comes to maybe explaining to the homeowner or business owner, wherever maybe these need to be added on, that putting one of these on, and then if you leave a hose connected on it with like again, a splitter further down, or one of your spray nozzles or something, that is potentially defeating the purpose and might make these malfunction. Fire hydrants are a source that a lot of times people will overlook when it comes to considering if they're protected with cross connections. Really, what you're going to want to do is make sure that, one, you have basically, you know, regulations, you have protection against unauthorized use. And when you do permit people to make use of a hydrant, whether it's, you know, filling up a truck, water tanks, things like that, you want to make sure that you have, generally you want to have a meter to keep track of what they're using, as well as then a backflow preventer to protect your system. We've seen where you can have, there's a pile of them here of some portable RPZ units. Again, these would need to be getting tested, you know, going with each use, because technically every time they're sent out, it's a new installation. You want to make sure it's still functional. Another thing I have seen systems do is basically they have a designed air gap that when people want to fill things up, like we have a picture here of a person using a hydrant to fill the tank being pulled by their truck. They might go through the vertical hatch, and they basically have just something they set right up on there that the hose might clip into, that basically just physically prevents the hose from potentially dropping into that tank. And they just maintain an air gap that way. So whatever way your water system decides to go about it, you just want to make sure that you're preventing unauthorized use really within any reasonable means that you can, and that when you are allowing use of hydrants, you're doing that in a safe manner. Again, with water softeners, in this case, really what your issues are potentially going to be is when the waste lines for when they discharge coming off. In this case, from this example, there was not an air gap being provided, so it's possible for it to actually siphon things back up through that waistline. A very common way of fixing these is, again, just cutting off, terminating the pipe right above whatever, whatever it's draining into, just maintaining an air gap that way. If that's not possible, or if it'd be too much of a mess, then you can look into installing a mechanical backflow preventer. So with things like these water softeners, water heaters, things like that, you really want to make sure that air gaps are being maintained on their discharge lines. We've talked about toilets and stuff before. A lot of them, with them now, you might see just a vacuum breaker is installed right up above the unit itself. For those that aren't, again, specifically the ones that are the water closets where they've got the water tank set up on the back of the unit, they need to have the anti-siphon valve inside of it. And if it matters, when you're going to check stuff, those anti-siphon valves, that's going to be ASSE 1002 is the certification that goes with those ones. So again, newer units, this is stuff that's built in with them. We can look at some of these. I think it's safe to say it looks like they've been there for a while. If they're older units, they might need updating. At laboratories, we're going to start getting some of the overlap with stuff we've looked at before, but again, you might have chemical dispensers, you might have some of those aspirators. Again, there could be several uses going on in some of these, and you just want to make sure whether it's an appropriate vacuum breaker, air gaps being maintained, whatever is in place. Again, that these various use points, all of them should have some protective measure in place upstream of the units. Greenhouses are another one that can kind of slip by because they might not be an obvious one right from the start, but if you think about it, they're going to have irrigation systems. A lot of them might use chemical additives. Basically, we've already talked about how lawn irrigation can be a problem. We've talked about how we want to keep an eye on some of these chemical dispensers, or if they've got any booster pumps. Well, those can all be present at these nurseries, greenhouses, flower shops. So it might look pretty inconspicuous from the front, but when you get behind the scenes, there can be quite a bit going on. And as we can see in this place, they have what we'll call kind of a chemical application center. They've got whatever they're looking to spray their plants with down in this barrel. Might be a fertilizer, again, a pesticide. We'll see what it is. But then as we can tell from this picture, it's safe to say whatever they have down in there, we don't want to be seeing in our potable water supply. So again, we need to look at, for their zone control system, is there chemical dispenser, is how this chemical is being introduced in, do we have adequate protection against that?
Hey, Bob, just wanted to give you a time check.
Anyone,
can you hear me?
Yep. Okay.
Just wanted to give you a time check,
So
let you know
try to
you're
get
at
through these
11:05.
last few slides here. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I
just had a little
can.
restart.
Yeah,
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So going back, this is a reverse osmosis unit.
we are not seeing your screen at the moment.
Okay, let me pull it back up. I think I had a interruption there. Let me.
And I
pull
don't know if
this.
you heard me, but I was just giving you a
Yeah,
time check at 11:05.
yeah. No, I heard your time check, and then I think my
Okay,
system had a hiccup.
sure.
So, all right. Hopefully, you should see my see some
You are
of
in
this again.
design mode, so I'll let you know when we see it in okay, presentation mode. You're on slide 51.
All right. Sorry for that little interruption, everyone. We're back where we need to be. So these aren't always aren't as common out there, but this is a reverse osmosis system, which is basically a very, very high-end filter. Um, these are going to require an RPZ installed with them because their waste streams and the products that they have that they can generate can be some very concentrated and very undesirable stuff. So just when you see some of these RO units being installed, they should have, again, an RPZ upstream of them so that we don't get anything being collected or then rejected by this RO system, potentially getting back to your potable water supply. Marinas are going to be places, generally you can have fish cleaning stations, boat washing stations. You got people rinsing out sometimes the water tanks on the boats. Again, that's all stuff where we don't know what that water quality is, or we don't want, or obviously they're using water that's coming from somewhere, and if it's from your system, we don't want to be getting any of those byproducts back into that, or run the risk of accidentally intermixing if they had made use of any basically untreated surface water previously. We don't want to accidentally introduce that into our systems. So you're going to see a couple examples here. Again, fish cleaning station. There's a wash station by the docks. Again, a couple more filling station or washing stations. These are all things to keep an eye out around some of the marinas and dockyards. Medical buildings. Everything they're doing, a lot of the things they use, again, aspirators, a lot of the equipment might need water cooling or uses water as part of the process. A lot of dental equipment, they'll have, like, again, the little water, water jets or things like that. Those are all points of potential cross connection that could occur. And a lot of times these offices get very complicated because they have a lot of this equipment present. These are ones where sometimes containment is a recommended course of action, just because it's simpler to have a single containment point instead of trying to get every single piece of equipment or every single one of their exams insulated. In this case, they had a whirlpool bath that was used as some of the therapy, and they had an RPZ that was put in place here, which was the correctly chosen way to try to protect against that use. It's really, again, you're just trying to keep in mind where they don't think because they have one thing protected that they've got everything taken care of, or everything as a whole is going to be taken care of. The one question would be, is because it's below grade, is to make sure that this isn't going to become subject to flooding potentially. That would be the one concern with the RPZ. We've got, again, photo equipment. They use water for rinsing or some of the processing. Any of the chemicals that are being applied here can be problematic. So I know I'm starting to get a little faster through these slides, but it's just a lot of this. We're taking concepts we saw earlier, and it's just, again, identifying where we have these points of use. Where is that water coming from? And if it is from our public supply, how is that being protected against? So in this case, this is actually for X-ray development. And we've got the tanks down in here have some pretty harsh chemicals inside of them. They had it protected by this pressure vacuum breaker. The reason this becomes a problem is because they've added this hose bib on the end. And now we've got this hose running somewhere off picture. Which again, this is one of those things that would be an example of we had a correct install, we did not have an issue, and now a modification has been made, which might cause a new problem, depending on where this is going. And of course, when then you get to, this is an example of a plating factory, but really then a lot of your industry, a lot of different processes that go on there. A lot of them might use chemicals or have pretty significant byproducts. And then with that, just even their general cleaning purposes, there's a lot of different points where we might have cross-connection concerns. And again, this is another one you have to make the decision, is isolation or containment going to be a more appropriate approach? So in this case, this was at an industrial center. We've got a close-up on the next slide. There was an RPZ that was installed, but has really been kind of tucked away back here. And it's safe to say, because it was so hidden, and then just looking at the condition of that RPZ, I don't think it's gotten much attention. And I would doubt that it's functioning like it's supposed to at this point. So again, this is just why when you're going around to some of these properties, it's important to take a look at, again, are there things that need to be added? And then for what's there, is it still appropriate? Is it still functioning? So this is one, we've got this whole series of different tubs and sinks. We've got a whole bunch of submerged inlets that are in place. And what turned out on this one is this eye wash station was actually plumbed off that same section of plumbing. So what could happen in a backflow event is whatever is being held in these tubs could actually get pulled back into the plumbing and then would be coming out of this eye wash station, which really is defeating the purpose of the eye wash and could really create, I mean, a very direct and obvious health hazard being presented there. It also turned out there was a drinking fountain attached to that same section of plumbing. So this was all potential exposure risks that was not being properly protected against. Some of our last slides here is you get some of these large basins, whether you want to call it a pool. These might be holding tanks. On our next slide, we're seeing it's wastewater facilities. Again, these are all potential sources where we're going to have water, chemicals, or byproducts of really potentially dangerous and certainly undesirable qualities we don't want to have coming back into the system. So these all are going to need some kind of backflow protection on them. In this case, you would like to have air gap. Again, if you can manage air gaps, those are always a very simple, and again, a very high order of protection. You just need to make sure that they're not at risk of being a submerged inlet. Similarly for wastewater, again, if they got holding tanks, any of these chemical tanks, we want to have these protective measures in place against them. We have inside, one of the things they've been able to do and help manage is that they have very clear labeling of the different plumbing, which can be very useful and helpful in determining whether a cross connection exists or not.